Natalie, first of all, we have to set the ground rules for this interview. It'll be all in English, no Russian.
Oh, good, all right.
I think most people don't realize that you do have an honest-to-goodness Russian heritage.
Yes, that's right. My parents were born there, and they came here when they were like 4 years old or something, so they really don't remember it very well. But I did speak it when I was a child, and so this part made it more interesting because it was the first time that I found it really necessary to study it formally, you know, before I just learned it as a child does.
Did that, the fact that you have the Russian background and you did speak Russian, did that have anything at all to do with your getting the role?
Oh yes, I think it did tremendously because originally there was, I'm sorry, but that's so distracting when people are whispering and all that. Do you think we could start again? Is something wrong?
Okay, let me just re-ask that second question. We can make an edit there.
Let's start over. I just pull you back and then come again.
All right, from the top? Okay.
Okay.
Well, Natalie, first of all, we have to set some ground rules for this interview. It will be in English, no Russian, if you please.
Okay, that's fine.
I think a lot of people don't realize, Natalie, that you do have a Russian heritage.
I guess so. Well, when I was in Russia recently, which is my first trip, I went there after I did Meteor. All the people there said, "Oh, well, you're so typically American. How is it that you speak Russian?" But my parents were born there, and they came here when they were about 4 years old. And of course, I was born in San Francisco, and I had never been to Russia. I wish I had been able to make the trip there prior to making Meteor, but I had seen enough film and looked at enough magazines, and I think that we authentically depict the look of the people.
The fact that you could speak Russian, did that have anything to do with your getting the role?
Oh yes, it did, because a friend of mine is a composer named Leslie Frickus, and he was a friend, or is a friend, of the directors, and they were having dinner one night, and the director was saying how difficult it was going to be to find an American actress that could speak Russian. And then Leslie remembered that I did speak it, and he told the director that. And then Leslie was the one who called me up to tell me about the project, so it didn't come about in the normal channels, you know, through an agent and all of that. But otherwise, somebody would have had to learn it as Brian did, just phonetically, you know, by sound. And it was a little more difficult because I had to do the simultaneous translating, which meant getting on another actor's rhythm, you know, and when he paused, then that's when I would come in with the translation. And then, you know, doing the English with the Russian accent.
Were you able to help Brian, because I assume he had no previous experience with the Russian language?
No, but he has an incredible ear. He can really do accents, you know, in English, of almost any kind of accent that there is. But he, oh sure, we worked together with my teacher, and the three of us talked, and he wrote out his dialogue as he visualized the sounds to be. Because the pronunciation is difficult for you know, our tongues. The sounds are really quite different.
Natalie, as I watched the scenes, particularly when you're in the subway and all the muddy water is coming in, and as I looked at those scenes, I thought, people who say, gosh, making movies must be the most fun in the world, they had to go through a day's work like that. Now, how many days were you doing that scene?
We were in the mud about 2 weeks, I guess. 2 weeks solidly.
And what was it like to do that?
Well, it was winter, for one thing. It was very, very cold. The first day, I think the mud was heated, but eventually it just wasn't possible to keep it heated. So it was quite cold. It was also not the way we visualized it. When we read the script, somehow all of us imagined that the mud would, you know, just slowly rise up and be like that. But it wasn't like that. As you saw, it came out at small directions, you know, and through the walls, through the ceiling. It was like being in a mix master. So you couldn't really hear anything except this deafening noise of the, you know, the mud pouring through. So if anyone had yelled stop or cut or there was a problem, the actors wouldn't have known. So there was an element of danger. I mean, I did feel frightened, I have to admit.
In other movies, have you ever done scenes comparable to that, where you were that uncomfortable or that frightened?
Well, the only time I was that uncomfortable was a film I made called The Great Race, where I had to be covered in pies, and literally my entire body had to be covered in pies, and I think we did that for about 2 weeks. So towards the end, you know, the last week, because it started off just with one in the face, and then a few more, and eventually I was just covered from top to head to toe. And so it meant coming in the morning and just being plastered with the gooey, sticky pies, and then staying that way all day. So it was a bit like the mud. At least with the mud sequences, we took a lot of showers in between times. We would wash it all off, and then we would get back in it. But with the pies, you couldn't. You were just a living statue.
Great if you have a sweet tooth, I
Yeah.
guess. Natalie, was there ever any discussion about when your husband, you call him RJ, when Bob Wagner took this TV series Heart to Heart, which he's doing now, was there ever any discussion on anybody's part about the two of you starring in it together?
Oh, yes. I think it was the natural, you know, a natural thought. But from our point of view, it would have been just impossible for me to do because it's so time-consuming that we would never have seen the children. And we have tried to arrange our work schedule so that one of us at least is not working. And so far we've been fortunate. I mean, if I'm working, RJ has been able to be off so that one of us is, you know, able to be with the kids. Otherwise they'd never see us.
Because his work schedule now, when he's shooting that, runs from all day to into the night, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Natalie, you were in the movie when you were very, very young with John Wayne in The Searchers. And of course now everybody who ever worked with him has a favorite memory of John Wayne. What is your favorite memory of him?
Gosh, I've known him over the years, even beyond that picture. And he was such a lovely man. I think his kindness more than anything, his consideration towards other actors. And when I was working on that picture, it was a difficult location. It was in the Monument Valley, and we were on an Indian reservation, and there were no other young people. I was the only young person around. And, you know, they had the sort of John Ford Road Company, and so they played poker every night. And, you know, for a teenager, it wasn't really the greatest. And of all the people, I think John Wayne was the most aware of that and very kind about it, you know. And he was a terrific fellow.
Natalie, one last question, and that is this movie, Meteor, where you're the Russian interpreter. You say you went to Russia after you made the movie.
Yes.
If you were making Meteor now, since you have had the experience of being in Russia, is there anything you would change about your character?
Well, I mean, one would always change something. If you have a chance to redo a part, there are always things you would change. But no, I was happy that the research that we did do, you know, in terms of clothes and the general look, seemed to coincide with the interpreters that I was assigned to when I was there anyway.
Think the Russians are going to like Meteor if they should see it?
I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say.
Well, I predict that Americans, and I'm sure Europeans, are going to enjoy it very, very much, and they'll enjoy you in it. I really think they will.
Well, I hope you're right.
Natalie, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Charming visit.
Thanks.
Nice interview. Thank you. Very nice interview. Okay, that ought to be enough of that. Okay, you can just keep it rolling. You don't, okay? Natalie, the fact that you do have Russian heritage, was that the factor in your getting this role in Meteor? Natalie, I think people have a Natalie, I think people have a tendency to think that making movies is such fun. But when you were in all that muddy water, I'm sure you had different thoughts. Tell us about that scene. Okay. Throughout your career, have there been comparable scenes like that as far as where you were uncomfortable and maybe a little bit frightened? Okay, and Natalie, did anybody, when your husband, you call him RJ, Bob Wagner, when he was going into Heart to Heart, did anybody talk about the fact that the two of you might do the series together? And one last question. Natalie, when you were very young, you did a movie with John Wayne, The Searchers. What is your favorite recollection? Chicken Little was right. The sky did fall in here in Arizona 22,000 years ago, and when it did, it made a hole in the ground known as Meteor Crater. Huge meteors falling to Earth, I must admit, is not high on my list of worries. But for American International Pictures, who brought us here, it's wonderful hype for their movie. I'm sorry. Okay. I must admit, huge meteors falling to Earth isn't high on my list of worries. But for American International Pictures, who brought us here, it's wonderful hype for their movie. Bobby Wygant, Channel 5 Action News at Meteor Crater, 40 miles east of Flagstaff, Arizona.
Got it. Nice. Channel 5, but Channel 12 slogan is Action News.
Oh, yeah, Action News is everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Can we help you out?
Yes, because I don't like